Senator Bellemare, thank you very much. I don't know whether you read the report. Perhaps you took a look at it. I think some of you looked at it attentively, I'm certain of it. But nevertheless, it is a bit difficult in its form because it's proposing some changes, but I will give an overview of what it contains.
The Rules Committee wrote to the Clerk of the Senate inviting the Senate administration to identify changes to the rules of the Senate which the committee may wish to consider. Over the course of two meetings on June 14, 2022 and September 27, 2022, the clerk, accompanied by other senior officials, outlined a number of potential issues. After further consideration by the committee, the report before you today reflects those changes which the committee agreed to. Many of the changes reflect minor correction, errors in translation, or elements that are no longer required due to legislative changes. I will not go into detail on these items, but they include such things as the removal of the prohibition on smoking in Senate and committee proceedings. Since 1988, the Non-Smoker Health Act has prohibited smoking in federal workspaces, making those provisions of the rules obsolete. However, there are some elements which require some explanation, and I will address each of these in turn. L'article 10.
Current Rule 10-10, in its current form, concerns the preparation and printing of bills in the Senate. It has not been revisited in any significant way since its predecessor rule was first adopted in 1923. Consequently, it has not kept pace with modern practices, particularly the new bill format implemented in 2016 by the three federal entities that draft legislation, namely the Senate, the House of Commons, and the Department of Justice. The Office of the Law Clerk and Parliamentary Council recommended that this rule be repealed in its entirety, as its constituent elements concerning the form of amending bills, typographical indications of amendments, explanatory notes on amending bills, and reprints of Senate bills have not been strictly adhered to in many years and reflect a time when legislative information could be cumbersome to obtain. In its place, the law clerk has proposed a new Rule 10-10, which would allow for administrative and typographical corrections to bills by the law clerk and the Parliamentary Council. This would simplify clause-by-clause consideration, reduce the risk of errors in legislative texts, and minimize the risk that additional amendments may be required to address errors introduced into bills during the legislative process in either House of Parliament. Therefore, the proposed text is similar to Standing Order 154 of the House of Commons.
12-23-6 currently requires a committee report recommending amendments to a bill to, and I quote, have attached to it a printed copy of the bill on which the amendments are clearly written. The chair or deputy chair shall sign or initial this copy of the bill as well as all the amendments. Fin de la citation.
End of quote.
This has resulted in a time-consuming process where amendments were physically cut and pasted into a copy of the bill. The committee learned that in recent years, this process was replaced by attaching a copy of the committee's report to the bill. However, as the copy is not required at any subsequent stage of the legislative process, it serves no purpose and its continuation is not necessary. Rule 12-26 requires committees to table reports on financial expenditure in the previous session. Progressive changes to the Senate proactive disclosure requirements, in accordance with provisions contained in the Access of Information Act, have rendered these reporting requirements redundant, as this information is already required by legislation to be reported publicly on at least quarterly basis. As the reports under Rule 12-26 cover the period of a session, rather than a quarter of fiscal year, these reports can cause confusion since the same information is reported in different ways. As such, the committee is recommending that Rules 12-26, parenthesis 2 through parenthesis 4 be deleted. As noted, this reporting practice has been overtaken by other reporting requirements, thus rendering this requirement redundant. It will no way reduce the transparency surrounding committee spending. Maintenant.
And now, Rule 14-16 provides that when there is a requirement under a rule, statute, or order that a return report or other paper be laid before the Senate, it may be deposited with the clerk. This has required officials from government departments and agencies to attend the clerk's office to provide physical copies of the hundreds of annual reports and other documents required to be tabled in the Senate. As part of the Senate's response to the COVID pandemic, sessional orders were adopted, allowing these documents to be deposited with the clerk's office electronically. While this was initially envisioned as a COVID-19 measure to limit the number of people required to enter the Senate of Canada building, it quickly became clear that there were advantages beyond the pandemic context. Allowing these documents to be deposited electronically makes them easier to gather, easier to share with senators and the public when required. It facilitates archiving and is in keeping with the Senate's environmental goals by reducing paper use. There is currently a sessional order allowing this practice to continue, but the committee recommends that they be entrenched in our rules with these amendments. Finally,
a new rule, 1-1, parenthesis 3, which would allow the Speaker of the Senate or the chair of a committee to authorize reasonable adjustments to the application of a rule or practice in order to allow a senator's full and equal participation in the Senate. This rule entrenches a long-standing but informal practice where the Speaker and senators have exercised discretion, compassion, and common sense to allow senators to continue to participate, even though they may not be able to strictly conform to certain provisions of the rules. It should be noted that this is intended to allow minor variances to allow senators to continue to participate in proceedings within the current context. Substantive changes to that context itself should only be addressed through a substantive motion adopted by the Senate. Now, before I conclude, I would like to highlight one element of the clerk's proposal that is not included in this report, and that has to do with consideration of reports from the Standing Committee on Ethics and Conflict of Interest for senators. The clerk had identified potential challenges with the timelines within which a report concerning a senator must be considered, and the possibility that a vote on the report may need to be put forward before the senator in question had been given the opportunity to speak to it. Before addressing this point of timing, The committee wanted to consult with the Ethics Committee, which is why it was not included in this report. However, those consultations have taken place, and potential amendments to the rules in that regard will be put to our committee for consideration, and if adopted, a further report will follow. On that, I thank you very much, and I hope you will adopt this report in due time. Thank you very much.
Senator Down, you have a question?
Yes, I do. I'm concerned about Section 113, the new rule, why the provision says may rather than shall. And colleagues, I'll take a moment to read it out. It's a short section. It reads, if a provision of these rules or practice of the Senate constitutes a barrier to a senator's full and equal participation in proceedings due to a disability is defined in the Accessible Canada Act, the Speaker or the Chair of the committee may authorize reasonable adjustments to the application of the rules or practice. Why is that not reading shall, so the senator can have full and equal participation?
Senator Bellemare.
Merci beaucoup.
Senator Bellemare, thank you very much. Thank you for this question, Senator Down. In French, we use the word the Speaker of the Senate or the committee chair can, or may in this case. So my understanding of the proposal that was written out by the clerk is that currently it is at the full discretion of the Speaker or Chair that minor adjustments be made. He does so, but it is not written in the rules. And so given the debate that we had in Bill and the Accessibility Act, we thought it would be good to put it in the rules that the Speaker or Chair has the authority to make provisions, to adjust, to allow for the full participation of the senator in question. So we use the word may in the context of what is currently done. So we didn't go farther than that. That is the answer that I can give. So now I cannot ask the clerk why in English they chose to use may and not shall. It's the same thing. Oh, it's not the same thing. Okay. Well, that is a good question. If it's not the same thing as in English, well, okay. So I have a French copy of the changes to the rules. So we'll get back to you on that.
And I trust the intention, but I'm sure colleagues would agree that it should not be left to the discretion whether senators can have full participation because they suffer a disability. In this chamber in the past, we have people who had a sight problem, adjustments were made. It should be automatic that all senators can have full participation. I agree with the intent. I don't think it's here. My second question is on Rule 2.8A. When the Senate is sitting, it is not permitted, for senators to engage in private conversations inside the bar, and if they do, the Speaker shall order them to go outside the bar. There's been a long tradition when there's disruption. If somebody's too loud, and I've been guilty of that myself, people frown and the Speaker will intervene if necessary. But according to this rule, if I'm speaking to my seatmate, I'm in violation of the rule. Is that correct?
Senatrice Bellemare.
Senator Bellemare, yes, you're quite right. That is the current rules. Nothing has changed. A was not changed. It is in 2.8 that we removed the smoking ban. But A and B remain in the rules. So there was no change proposed to that. And we know that, well, we we can't talk and disrupt others, but we made no changes to 2-8A. It remains unchanged.